Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Derris. This is my colleague, Olivia. We're gonna separate this into two distinct parts. First, I'm an entrepreneur also, so I understand what it's like to start a business. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about our process and kind of where we are and what our company does. And then Olivia is one of the directors in our business. And actually runs the team that's responsible for doing the press for our company, well, for a lot of them, Warby Parker, Thrive Market, a bunch of stuff like that. But most importantly, my wife's company, Lola, which actually graduated out of the lab last year, and we launched earlier this year and is doing terrifically well. So Liv is going to talk specifically about how we launched Lola and the tactics and like execution-wise, like how that works and how we're looking towards the future with it. And then we can obviously take questions. I run a 44-person PR and brand strategy shop in New York called Derris & Company. My name is Jesse Derris. It's very creative. Our company is also a startup. We're less than 3 years old. My background's originally politics. I was a spokesman on a bunch of campaigns. Ended up as the youngest spokesman on John Kerry's presidential 11 years ago. And then went to go work for a PR firm here in New York that's now called Sunshine Sachs. I was one of the first 7 people at the company. It's about 125 now. A couple of years in, I built their crisis business, did a lot of work in healthcare, finance, real estate. And a year or so in, as Silicon Alley took off, it was mostly media businesses at first. And we worked early on the Huffington Post because the founder of the company had a relationship with one of the funders of Huffington Post. I then met Ben Lear and worked on Thrillist very early, and Daily Candy hired us, and a bunch of others. And then in 2008, a friend of mine went back to business school and came up with this idea to sell glasses online that I thought was just totally asinine. I spent a bunch of time at Wharton with them, talking to them about the business, more so from a corporate social responsibility perspective and a tech press perspective. And that business launched and became Warby Parker, and did pretty well, and still does pretty well to this day. And one of the key takeaways that we had after about a year and a half in business, at least from my perspective, was the idea that PR was incredibly bifurcated for consumer brands. And what I meant by that, and what I still mean by that, is that consumer press was largely separated from tech and business and brand-oriented press. And that's the way every Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company does it. They have IR firms that talk to all the business press, and they have consumer people who pitch their products. And so it's the way all the firms were set up, all the legacy firms. We were doing the tech press for Warby. There was another firm doing all the fashion press for them. And I thought to myself, and this is my groundbreaking revelation, what if we could combine those two things and stop people from having to hire 2 firms? That was in the fall of 2012. I left Sunshine, took on a little bit of capital to start the business, and started effectively in January 2013. Like I said, today we're 43 people. Everybody's in New York. We're actually moving offices next Friday, which I'm super excited about, and continue to grow and have been super lucky. The business is separated into 2 parts. We do what we call strategic communications. It's crisis, real estate, finance, sports, everything from the Miami Dolphins and the Food Network to related companies and IDEO and General Catalyst and Thrive and Box Group and Oscar and a bunch of other stuff. And then the other side of the business is all brands. We're starting to take some larger brands. So for instance, we're the agency of record for Lululemon. But then, Warby Parker, Harry's, Everlane, Bobble Bar, Reformation, Sweetgreen, Dig In, Thrive Market, Spring, a whole bunch of others, Serena and Lily. We've been incredibly lucky in that we've been able to work with a lot of clients that we believe in and who we like, and have been able to be picky about the stuff we take on. And generally speaking, what we do is 2 things. So one is we help businesses think about their brand strategy and their brand stories. A good example of this is Everlane and Radical Transparency. We started working with them very early on and worked with them to help kind of uncover transparency, which was always really part of their DNA, but they hadn't really been marketing towards, and helped bear that out, and it's become central to the core of that brand. And then once we kind of figure out that piece, the story piece, we then can do both kind of consumer PR, no matter what the vertical is, and then we can also do all of the tech and the business and the brand press for a given brand. So things as mundane as sampling for fashion companies, or doing food stories for Sweetgreen, but then also putting companies on the cover of Fast Company Most Innovative, and doing TechCrunch and all of that stuff as well. And believe it or not, that is an innovation in PR. It's still, for some reason, 3 years in, nobody has copied us, which is great for us and really bad for them. Yeah, anyway, so my wife, her name is Jordana Kier. She went to Columbia Business School. She graduated, I think, in 2013, 2014, whatever. Yeah, you guys would know. You, right? She's 14. Okay, sweet. Yeah, I forget. She launched a feminine care business called Lola earlier this year. So I feel like I'll just pass this to you. I feel like what's most interesting for you guys, at least, and you can ask the questions after the fact, obviously, is to operationally hear how this is done, like how you launch a company. So Liv can talk through kind of what we did specifically for Lola, because obviously it's Jordy's company, and so we were very possessive about it. But we did exactly how, this is how I would launch my company, frankly.
Yeah, sure. Ooh.
Nice.
So I think when we first start working with a company, we have to really think about the strategy about how we're going to launch it. You only have one chance to launch. So with Lola in particular, we wanted to figure out, there are multiple ways of launching a company. You can do an embargo, you can do and hit a lot of different press at once, or you can do an exclusive route. I think the immediate thing is making sure that you're telling the story clearly and concisely. So we work with every brand that we launch, or even brands that we have taken on that have already launched. So Lululemon, for example, we sit with them and we do a brand deep dive. So we sit with them for a couple hours and we talk about the brand, if it's a new company, why they created it, what it means to them, and then how we're going to tell that story to press. You have to tell the story in a compelling way, in a way that really relates. So like Jesse gave the example of radical transparency. That's something that Everlane had, but they didn't really know they had it. They weren't talking about it in the same way. So for Lola in particular, we were really answering one question, which was, for all the women out there, what's in your tampon? It was a question that not many women ask themselves. So Jordana actually, when she was going to launch the company, she was just going to launch a subscription service, and she was going to sell existing tampons, so Tampax, Playtex, whatever that's already on the market, and have it delivered to your door at the time that you want it every month. But then she started looking into it a little bit more and realized, women don't actually know what's in their tampon, and so she started doing a ton of research and found out that while the FDA does regulate feminine care, they don't require that the big brands disclose ingredients on their packaging. So brands like Playtex and Tampax don't say, they'll say it may contain rayon, polyester, cotton. Obviously, you don't want to hear that polyester is in your a product that you're using every month. And so, especially one that's such an intimate product. So Jordana really kind of, and her business partner, Alex Friedman, took that and started to say, well, if we're going to launch a brand, we want to launch a brand that we really stand behind, and we want to launch a product that we stand behind. And so they were able to source a manufacturer in Europe and create their own product that's 100% cotton. So when we were talking about how we're going to talk about the brand to press, that's really what stuck with us, that question of what's in your product. So we had to kind of educate people. Listen, you think it's a white, fluffy product. You think it's probably 100% cotton, but it's not. And that was really eye-opening to a lot of people. A lot of people didn't know that and weren't kind of willing or wanted to talk about it. So we came up with, the brand, the message hierarchy that we do for every brand, which is exactly how do we talk about this company and what are the key points. So for Lola in particular, it was transparency of ingredients. It was ease of service. So the fact that it's a subscription service, it's something that happens. Your period is something that happens every month. So why run to the drugstore and get a new product when you can just have it delivered to you when you need it? And then it's also tailored, so you can tailor the absorbency of the assortment that you have. And so for us, it was working with press to kind of convey that message. So how do we do that? We build a press kit that every brand, we have one. It basically outlines in a beautifully designed way with images and graphics exactly how we talk about the brand and the important things about it. Anything I'm missing there?
No, I mean, you want to grab this for one sec? So I think what's important here, again, and Liv said this in large part, we generate 2 documents early on with a client. One is a messaging document. That document has 3 components. The first is what's your brand in 1 line, essentially. So, Lola is a transparent feminine care brand, essentially. And then it's what's your messaging hierarchy. So for Lola specifically, it was transparency, convenience, and customization. So we're going to tell you what's in the product when nobody else will. We're going to send it to your house every month, and you can set it and forget it. And number 3 is, believe it or not, there's different sizes of tampons. And most companies make you buy static assortments, and we were going to let you pick exactly what you needed. The last part of that document, we call it a foil. It's more of an internal mechanism that we use with reporters once in a while, very off the record. And it's meant to show who we are not. So who we are not in this case is Tampax and Playtex and OB and everybody else that's on the market. And then the second document that Liv is talking about is taking this sort of unemotional messaging document and turning it into a more emotive story through the lens of a press kit. A press kit is going to look and feel a lot like the user experience on your website and have the branding and all of those things. It's going to tell the story of the foundation of the company. It's going to show off the product and talk about product differentiation. It's going to show some content if you guys have content. But essentially, it's going to be a document that's a beautiful kind of PDF document that when you send to a reporter, they'll look at it, completely understand the brand after reading it, and hopefully copy a lot of the words out of it for their story. They do. Yeah, they do a lot of the time. So, want to talk through tactically the launch? Yeah. So tactically, we, like I said earlier, we try to think of exactly how we're going to launch the brand. So, you could do an exclusive route. Warby Parker is an example of they went to Vogue and GQ because they really wanted to set the foundation for building a fashion brand first and foremost. Instead of going to a wide range of press. For Lola in particular, we really wanted to get the word out and get it out to a lot of different people and a lot of different verticals. So we set an embargo date. I think it was July 8th. What's an embargo?
An embargo is, so basically we pitch the news to media. We make them agree to embargo the news, so keep the news private until a date and time that we give them. So I'll reach out and say, hey, I've got some upcoming news about X, Y, and Z. Can you agree to keep it private until July 8th at 9 a.m.? Once we get press to agree to that, it's a contract. They're used to this kind of back and forth. We send them all of the information, set up meetings. One thing that is really important is desk sides. Desk sides are just in-person meetings. I don't know why they're called desk sides. I think they were done at a desk at some point. But they're meetings with an editor in person, and you do the interview, and it's a way for them to meet the founders firsthand, have the founders tell their stories, and then have them write the stories. We typically do that outreach. So we start pitching, I would say, about 4 weeks out, hoping to set up the desk sides in the 2 weeks prior to the launch date that we've decided. So for Lola in particular, it was July 8th. We do conduct those meetings, and then follow up with press, any questions they have, images they need, and then on July 8th, 9 a.m., articles start to appear. It's not always a huge floodgate, but we typically have a sense of what articles are going to run that day and in the week following. For Lola in particular, in the first week, we had 30 to 40 stories run. Again, they launched in July, and we've had, I think, 130 stories run since then, which is pretty insane. Everyone from Elle to Yahoo to BuzzFeed to Fast Company, Forbes, Fox News, local broadcast, and then Fox Business, TechCrunch, Refinery 29, Racked, everyone wrote about it. And I think what really resonated with a lot of people is this issue that I went back to about transparency and not really knowing what's in a product that's such an intimate product for a lot of women. So that's kind of where we really resonated. And there have since been a ton of articles who are talking about it as an overall trend. And so we've been mentioned in a lot of those as well. Anything else in this?
No, so I think the most important takeaways here are spend a lot of time on messaging up front. I think we fundamentally believe, Liv talked a little bit about the Warby Parker launch. It was 5 years ago now. And what worked 5 years ago before there was very many startups or startup labs or incubators or anything doesn't necessarily work now. I don't think we would ever look a client in the eye and say, yeah, 2 stories should do it. The key now is making people, especially the community of people that makes up early adopters, especially if you're selling a consumer product of any kind, they have to feel like the thing is successful. People vote for winners. And so the reason you go out and get a company that sells tampons 25 stories the first day is because it's an intimate product. You want people to buy it, and they're only going to buy it if they think it's successful, and it's only going to look successful if they're seeing it on their Facebook feed, and it's only going to show up on their Facebook feed if it's in enough places that enough people are going to see it and put it on their Facebook feed. And once that happens, frankly, life becomes easier. So as Liv said, if you do well enough on the first couple of days, you start to get incoming, and people start to come to you. And you're not pitching necessarily because people think you're successful and they think there's a race to get you and they want to get you. Beyond that, and I think this is important, we tend to look at stories in 2 broad buckets. Actually, I'll step back for 1 second. We tend to look at brands in 2 broad ways now. We have a pretty generalized thesis on this. Brands are either, and I'm talking about consumer products, platforms, anything, brands are either price brands or issue brands. Price brands are brands that deliver an arbitrage opportunity for consumers, right? Harry's is a classic price brand. They take a Gillette razor blade that costs $4 at Duane Reade around the corner, and they sell it to you for $1.96. That's a better deal. It happens to be a German engineered blade, and we do lots of things that make Harry's look a lot like Mercedes, and use a lot of the German car manufacturing techniques to market to consumers. And they've done that really, really well, but ultimately it's a price brand. A brand like Everlane or Reformation or Warby Parker are in part issue brands. They're brands that tackle an issue and talk about transparency or talk about buy a pair, give a pair, or talk about the environment like Ref does. And some of those brands that I mentioned are both. I mean, Everlane is both. Everlane is offering basically a discount price for fantastic product and also has a really great issue. But I think in order to really be something that's sticky for the press and that's writable over and over and over again, you have to carve out your niche and figure out what you are. Lola in particular is not a price brand. It's either the same price or slightly more money to buy Lola. But it's an issue brand in that it's 100% cotton, totally honest with you about what you're putting in your body, and it comes to your door, and it's convenient as hell. And so that's our issue, and that's the issue that we've been using to kind of talk about Lola over and over and over again, and that press seems to care about. You have to figure out what you are and start to build your story around that so that there's differentiation and reporters will care over and over again. That's one piece. The second piece is if you're looking at press, there's broadly speaking 2 types of press stories. One is a product story and one is a brand story. Product stories are anything about your product. That means new product SKUs, that means iteration of product, new colorways, it means new features if you're building a platform or a piece of software. It's anything that evolves the product in a way that you think is interesting enough to go out and speak to the press again. Product iteration is important. I would say for product-oriented companies that are selling consumer goods to people, product iteration is really, really important. You should be looking at the market that you're in and who in the press covers product in that market as a measure of how often you're going to be able to go to the press. For certain brands, these types of product stories lead to placement. So like a Warby Parker or a Reformation or anything like that, every time you open up GQ or Uncrate or whatever you were reading, and it says here's 5 pairs of sunglasses that guys should buy this spring, that's been pitched. Every single time that you see something on the Today Show, if you're watching the Today Show or whatever else you watch, that has a contributor on that talks about 5 looks for spring and Reformation or Everlane on it, it's been pitched. So every single time any of these companies puts out a new color of anything or a new salad at Sweetgreen, because the food media covers that, anytime you do anything like that, that stuff is important to go out and tell the press and get press on. Brand stories are everything else. Brand stories are, the cotton story for Lola. It's partnerships that you do with other like-minded brands. Those brands either need to be bigger or cooler. It has to be one or the other every single time. If it's not either, then it's not a partnership you should do. They can be stories about culture and the culture of the business that you're building, or about employee perks, although that's getting harder and harder, or anything else having to do with the company. I mean, the most mundane thing we've done in the last year and a half around this subject is we got, I think it was a Fast Company to write a story about Warby Parker's internal book club.
Yes.
I mean, literally it can be anything, but that's super helpful as an employment brand. They have an internal book club there. Cool, I want to go work there. And what worked in the past, snacks and everything else, is evolving into meditation and whatever else is going to happen tomorrow. But I think the point is to kind of find these stories on both sides and be able to tell them effectively over and over and over again. I think for a lot of you guys, and Lola included, you're not spending tons of money on paid acquisition early. Hopefully your businesses, if they need paid acquisition, are going to be efficient businesses when it comes to paid. But if not, you're going to be counting on press a lot very early on, and you need to be able to iterate and go tell new stories. Anything else?
I would say for Lola in particular, in terms of product press, that was a difficult one, and that's one where we managed client expectations a lot before we started pitching, but AKA Jesse's expectation. No, I'm just kidding. Because we didn't think that if you read a lot of the glossy magazines, they don't do a roundup of the best tampons you're going to buy every month. Cosmo doesn't even write it. No one really writes it. And if they're going to include a product, it's going to be one of the big advertisers. It's going to be Tampax or Playtex. So because we had built such a story around this cause, however, Cosmo wrote about us in last 2 months ago, their issue. It was the only tampon brand that they included. And they said, know what's in your products for tampons that you want to buy. Go to mylola.com and purchase. And we were pretty shocked, I think.
That I was right?
That I was, yes.
Okay.
True. But that's just an example of if you build a strong enough story around kind of the brand and the cause that you're promoting, then you might be able to kind of break through in terms of product press where we thought it would be difficult.
Yeah. And one last thing, and then obviously you can take as many questions as possible. A lot of our brands are driving into content now. And I think it's important to talk about just as for anybody who's thinking about building a lifestyle brand of any sort. And that's a really catch-all because it gets a better multiple than non-lifestyle brands apparently. But what we do with brand strategy is help to build a brand lens, right? That brand lens can be radical transparency. It can be transparency in tampons. It can be it can be the Reformation ecological language. It could be Oscar, which is about it's like having a doctor in the family. Whatever your brand lens is the thing that you're going to be able to go out and tell press as a story. But it also has to be present in all the omni-channel marketing that you guys do. And we're not a marketing agency, but a lot of the differentiation we see and the way we decide about clients is how strong we think they're going to be able to tell a marketing story. Because we can do all the press in the world, but if they're not doing that well and telling it through the multiple channels that they have access to, then they're probably not going to succeed. And so what does that mean specifically? And does everybody here know what Everlane is? If you don't, look it up. They sell men's and women's clothes. The entire idea is that they're transparent about, what? Oh, this is Everlane, yeah. About where the clothes are made, who's making them, the factories, et cetera, and then also about their margins. So they'll tell you how much the thread costs and the cloth and the buttons and the labor and what their markup is. And the entire idea is to build a Whole Foods of fashion. Now, the fashion has to be cool because it's got to have fashion credibility, but you also want to be conscientious with consumers and give them information that we think they want to know, right? What Everlane does exceptionally well is take radical transparency and have it live on multiple verticals, right? So if you go on their website, there's going to be a factories tab where you can look and they'll tell you all about their factories. When you go and look up the individual products, there's going to be infographics about the price of a t-shirt and why it costs that much, or the price of this button down and why it costs that much. They'll compare it to what luxury brands charge and what their markups are. When you look at the emails they do, yeah, they're about fashion, but they're also about transparency and retail and things like that. When you look at the pop-ups they do and the other physical activations, we literally did something in New York on the Bowery last year called the Transparent House, where you could see the price of every single thing in there. And you could walk in and buy stuff and understand why it costs what it costs. And it was as much an art exhibition as anything else. It was gorgeous. And they'll start to do paid soon, and it'll all be around transparency and display and everything else. And they've gotten that brand. It's a large brand now. They've done a really good job communicating the small message that we built for press and making it their brand message and telling it through the various channels. So we see tons and tons of people come to us now as they're starting brands, and they're thinking about what content means for them. And it means all of those things. We're also seeing more and more companies start magazines or blogs or other things. I mean, they might start a blog and call it a magazine, or start an actual physical magazine. We've seen a couple of those lately. I think the most important thing to understand there is what you're basically trying to do is get people to spend more time on your site, right? And so if you're thinking about it that way and you're wanting to get people to spend more time, interacting with your brand, think forward, don't think now. So if you look at the way media is headed, and I've just been thinking about this a lot lately, Business Insider just started a new vertical called The Insider. It only lives on Facebook right now. They're starting to, they'll build a site for it by the spring. And it's targeted towards millennial women, and it's supposed to be like a visual version of the Skim. So like news that's meant to be consumed by 20 and 30-year-old women. The rules of the site are essentially that it's all video, everything is 30 to 90 seconds long, and it all has to be consumable whether the person is listening to it or just looking at it. Kind of difficult. It's like lowest common denominator news. If Business Insider is doing that, and you're going to start to see other people. Facebook is largely moving towards video, et cetera. Start to solve for what's going to come next. Don't necessarily start the thing that happened before you. So if you're thinking about content, think about whatever is going to be, take a look around the media landscape and start to see where things are and take a guess. Being right on a guess is great, and you'll need some luck, but it's worth it. If I were starting out today, I wouldn't start a blog because a blog's not going to make any difference. Unless the content is so good or so compelling or whatever else that it becomes, exceptional. Anyway. Good? Cool. Sweet. Questions?
So you must have a lot of consciousness around what magazines like Wired, Fast Company, Inc., all those are doing, top 10 cited new technology lists. Do you have a schedule so that when clients that are in the technology space need to post a story, you just start targeting those writers, the people who put those columns out? And how do you manage that?
So I think there's two answers to this. I think for some of the bigger lists, we definitely can refer to editorial calendars. So if you're talking about like Fast Company Most Innovative and things like that, but very large things. If you're talking about the digital only lists that are like 10 cool gadgets for the fall, there's not really a calendar. What you're doing is you're in continuous conversation with the group of people and editors that write those things, and you try to make sure your companies are top of mind. Right? You're not bombarding them. I would say that if we're pitching contacts, we're not pitching them more than monthly for each client. We're just very cognizant of how much we're out there. A business like Reformation is probably putting out, I mean, now it's going monthly, but at first they were putting out 30 or 40 SKUs a month. We were picking out like one thing a month to go bother people with. You just have to be really selective.
You talked a lot about launch, but how do you think about the post-launch period, and especially for product companies, where like product innovation isn't like a monthly activity necessarily? how do you stay top of mind? How do you engage the press when you don't always have something completely newsworthy?
Yeah, it's hard if you don't have news. But I think that's part of, so there's two parts to that. Part of our job is to mine for news, right? So we typically have a contact at, the company whose job it is to just give us updates about what's going on all the time. And it's, up to us to kind of look at all of that and say, okay, could we pitch a story on the fact that you guys are doing book clubs at Warby Parker? Like, maybe let's try. So that's part of our job, is to kind of assess when there isn't a big funding announcement or a big product launch, how do we continue to generate news and make sure that the company is kind of in the press at all times. We also, in terms of kind of post-launch, we think of it in terms of the 3 Ps we like to talk about. So product, so iterating on product. So launching a new product, a new SKU of the product, a new colorway, something different. Physical, doing a pop-up shop, launching a store, doing some sort of activation physically where we can invite people to come and see and experience the brand firsthand. And then partnerships. What cool partnerships could we be doing? We actually have these discussions before we even launch the brand. We start to think about this stuff and start to try to get it in the works, because you don't want there to be a 6-month, year period where you have nothing to pitch. It's hard. In terms of partnerships, Jesse had mentioned this before, but we like to think of them in 2 ways. You only partner with a brand or a company or a cause that is bigger than you or cooler than you. Makes you bigger and makes you cooler. So do you want to go mass market and partner with, a Nordstrom or something like that and reach a lot of people? Or do you want to do something really niche and small, but that is really cool and has a really cult following and that will expose you to a new audience? So that's typically how we think about it.
Yeah, got to manufacture, basically.
A lot of the teams in the lab, as you probably can guess, are not going to be able to engage with a group like yours at the top of their game. So they're going to have to hack a lot of this stuff. What kind of stuff should these guys be doing now in advance of their launch preparation, just on the practical side? Should they be cultivating ties with the tech or the press in their particular disciplines? Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff could they be thinking about now?
Yeah, so this is going to sound odd coming from a person who owns a PR firm, but you can do this yourself. I think it'll take up a chunk of your time, but it's doable, especially in this day and age. I think first things first, learn how to read. And by the way, really first, no, but learn how to read for bylines is what I really mean. I don't know how many people in here could honestly tell me that they're looking at the reporters' names when they're reading stories, but you should start to do that. It was the first thing I learned when I got into PR, and it was in politics. There are beats. Every reporter has a beat. So for instance, at Business Insider, there's a reporter that covers New York City e-commerce startups. So if you're a New York City e-commerce company, you should be pitching that reporter. They also have one that covers all the e-commerce startups in San Francisco. And then they have somebody else who covers healthcare in New York and somebody else. There's different people for everything. So that's number one. Start reading for bylines, understanding that each of those reporters has a beat, and that beat is usually pretty static. Read their stories and understand what they're writing so you can understand how to pitch them. Number two, you can find their contact information, right? And I would say there's one of 2 ways generally to find people's contact information. Some sites, again, BI is one of them, BuzzFeed's another. You literally click on the reporters' names. It'll pull up every story they've written and their email. And those are real emails. Go for it. With other outlets, whether it's the Times or anybody else, some of them have static formulas for their emails that you can figure out. Like the New York Post is always first initial last name at newyorkpost.com, at nypost.com. You can figure those out just by Googling around and starting to build your own lists. So byline, list, and then the third thing is pitching. I happen to think, listen, if we could pretend every single time we pitch something that it was coming from the founder, that would be super helpful. Because lots of press people hate PR people. We tend to get away with a lot more than other agencies because we have good clients and we're not idiots, so we pitch them decent things. but a few rules to think about. One, blast pitching is idiotic. So BCCing a whole bunch of reporters and sending them stuff, they hate. That's number one. Number two, especially if you're doing this on your own, don't necessarily pitch them during office hours. They're getting like 400 emails a day, right? And they're getting emails from people like us who they know, so they'll respond to those emails. But they're also getting emails from all sorts of other people, including idiots who are pitching them and people they've never heard of. So pitch them when you don't think they're getting tons of email. Send them an email at 9 o'clock at night. Send them an email that set Boomerang to send it at 5 in the morning, so when they wake up they see it in the morning. Like, do it so that it's going to show up in their inbox in a way they're going to see it. Don't send it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and 2 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody else is emailing them. Number three.
You're going to hate us now.
I know. Don't tell them I said that. Yeah, that. Number three, write personalized emails. Like, read what they're writing, refer to stuff that they've written in the recent past, and say, man, I love this article. I think you just might be interested in this. And then four, and this is more about content when you're pitching, don't ask for the moon, right? All you need to do, you guys are all entrepreneurs, you get in a room and you sell. So all you have to do at first, you don't have to get them to commit to the story, and this is the same thing we do. It's get a desk side. Get in front of the reporter, show them the product, let them taste it, let them touch it, let them feel it, let them play with it. Like, go in and close in person. All you need to do at the beginning is, I'm a founder, this is what I'm doing, I'd love to show it to you. And then totally last is, you can still enforce an embargo in the same way we would. Embargo is a very, very typical reporter thing. You really only have one time to launch. If TechCrunch writes a story that says you're launched, then Recode isn't going to write the same story, and neither is the Times.
Launching, like
yeah.
You're going to launch. It's no good.
Yeah. So like, when you're going to show off your product, you need to really think about that and do that in a way that you're going to get mass pretty quickly. So you guys can ask for an embargo in the same way we can. Just give yourself maybe a little more time. We would typically set an embargo from 4 weeks, as Olivia said, from 4 weeks from the day we start pitching. Give yourself 6, just because it's going to take a longer time for you to get in touch with people. Anyway, there is a very DIY way to do this without somebody like us. I think it's just about taking the time to do it the right way.
So that last piece of the pitch, where like there's an ask or like an implicit, like how do you navigate that? Like, say you do get a desk side, you've given them this information. Like, is there like an expectation that how are they used to being asked? How can you like tee up that kind of quid pro quo?
I would ask for the meeting. Once you have the meeting, it's all about following up. So I'll send you the images, or I'll send you more product to try, or it's literally, let me know if you're interested in covering. Feel free to be upfront. So 2 things that I would add to what Jesse said also. Don't send a 5-paragraph email. Literally, act like you're tweeting. Keep it as short as possible while giving the relevant information. If you're doing an embargo, the process is that you email them with enough information to get them interested, but not all of the information, so that they could write a story, and you ask them to agree to keep that to a certain date and time.
So what would the Lola one have been?
It would have been, hey, I'm reaching out about a new company that's hoping to modernize feminine care. Can you keep this under embargo until July 8th at 9 a.m. and I'll send you more information? Sure. We have to have it in writing. We've definitely been in situations where, you didn't have it in writing, there was kind of a misunderstanding, and then they post, and that's why you have good relationships with reporters, so you can fix that. But making sure that they agree to that, and then that's when you follow up with more information. Having a press kit or a document, a 1-pager outlining what your company is and what it does is really helpful. Putting it all in one place for them.
Do they agree to embargoes on things other than launch? So say you're launched.
Yeah, we do it all the time. So for product launches, or partnerships, or something with a celebrity or whatever. Hey, can you keep this? And you don't always have to say, can you keep this under wraps, or can you agree to keep this confidential until X date? For sure.
And embargoes work for long lead too. So just to explain to everybody, long lead is magazines. They work anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 months out, depending on the magazine you're talking about. It's to be in a physical magazine. General rule of thumb is 3. So if a fashion designer is going to put out a collection, they're generally, like, the embargo is like 6 months, 7 months long. So they're super used to working under embargo. Short and mid lead are the stuff that you see online. So Fast Company in-book in their magazine is going to be long lead and take 3 months. The stuff you read online, most of it is going to be super short lead and turn it around in anywhere from a day to a week or two. And so that stuff you can pitch under a much shorter kind of lead embargo time.
Most of what you talked about was business to consumer. Is there a different strategy for a business to business type?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the most important thing with B2B is that you're not necessarily talking to the same people, right? So in whatever industry you're in, there is undoubtedly a set of publications that are just read by those people. If you're in the apparel industry or the retail industry or any of that, there's a million of those trade publications. If you're in sports, there's trade. If you're in movies or entertainment, there's trade. If you're in food, there's a ton of trade. There's like Restaurant Magazine and there's all of this stuff. So I think the targets you're going after are whomever it is that can consume the product. The actual process doesn't change all that much.
Yeah.
Jesse, Olivia, it's been very interesting, especially a lot of the stuff you don't really think about when you're building a company.
Nobody ever thinks about press.
Well,
We're like the bastard stepchild.
even your background in politics, I think, up until like 2 months ago, I thought it's probably as relevant until reading about Uber and Airbnb and hiring Washington guys to help mobilize some of their business policy via legislature.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that, I'm in healthcare, I can see why that's relevant for a business like ours, but when you're servicing companies, do you see that as a service you can scale up beyond businesses that find themselves in areas that are legislated and regulated? When you take healthcare as an example.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm biased in favor of people who have political backgrounds. I just think they're incredibly smart and thoughtful, and you go through such a rigorous amount of training, and you work under such a huge amount of pressure from a pretty young age that a lot of those people just come out moving quicker. So, I think that's an incredibly relevant skill set. I think the companies that are hiring people out of politics are hiring them for a variety of different reasons. Uber. I mean, if you look at Uber or Airbnb, they're hiring them largely for regulatory reasons. They're facing, multiple front kind of campaign-like battles in cities and jurisdictions where they're either trying to change laws or impact laws as they are written. And so those people are as much manufacturing public interest campaigns as anything else. If you look at what Uber did earlier this year to mobilize against the taxi industry in de Blasio, I think that's a perfect example. And they've done a really nice job mobilizing people. I think other people have hired political folks just because they're smart. And I think in that sense, it's great. But I do think consumer marketing is a little bit different than like regulatory things. I've learned consumer over 10 years essentially doing this. I would say that I applied a lot of the things early on that I learned in politics to Warby because it was my first company that I worked on like this. And so we did opposition research, for instance, on their competitors, and we used to try to leak that data to people and get big stories written about their competitors. I don't think typical consumer press people did that stuff. We thought about kind of possible regulatory issues a lot. I mean, but I don't know if that answers the question, but I think they're super helpful. With a company like Oscar, Oscar is a consumer business that's caught up in the middle of a highly politicized piece of legislation, the ACA, Obamacare. And in that sense, it's very much been a public affairs fight alongside a consumer push. And in that sense, it's about showing people that a health insurance company can be kinder, gentler, nicer, and work economically as part of Obamacare. But it hasn't been as much about the actual regulatory fight itself. Is that helpful? I don't know.
Yeah, I saw in your bio that you guys work with companies in healthcare as well.
Yeah.
Healthcare is a dicey area, long sales cycles, and lots of old people that are like occupying positions.
Yeah, I'm pretty nerdy about healthcare. I like healthcare, all parts of it. I've worked on the hospital side, I've worked on the union and labor side. I've worked on other kind of care providers, the VCNYs of the world, and a bunch of stuff like that. And now obviously worked in health insurance and on plans and stuff. I find it all pretty fascinating. Lots of it are long sales cycles, but like right now we're in an open enrollment period for insurance, and we basically have a month-long sprint to sign up customers for the entire year, because it's the way the ACA works. And so in that one, it's a super short sales cycle. No sweat.
So a lot of what you guys have talked about is sort of controlling the conversation, controlling the messaging. But I have to imagine every now and then there are circumstances or situations where reporters don't tell the story that you wanted them to tell. What do you do, or what do you advise clients to do when a piece comes out that's written in an unflattering way or has the wrong angle? Do you react to it?
Or if they're like misspellings.
Yeah, or just factual. Yeah.
Oh yeah, factual. So
I'm usually on a plane.
crisis, Jesse. Yeah, I always get the crisis. For a lot of clients still ask us, hey, so can I read the article before it posts so that I can make sure that it's exactly how I would write it and I would want it written? Obviously, we all know we don't write the articles ourselves. We are not allowed to look at the articles before they're printed. If it's a really long article, so for Warby Parker, they were on the cover of Fast Company's Most Innovative issue last year. The fact check was really long. They went through a bunch of stuff with us.
What's a fact check?
Fact check is when a reporter or their fact checker, if it's a big, New York Times has their own fact checkers, for instance, they email you, they literally go through the article and they'll read it. They won't read you the article, but they'll read it in terms of facts that are stated throughout to make sure that it's correct so that there's no inaccurate information. So sometimes during that process, it's an opportunity for you to see where the story is headed, what's included in the story, and potentially try to shift it or shape it if you can. Get on the phone with the reporter and say, hey, you said this, that might not be totally inaccurate, but the way it's stated, I don't want it to come across like this. And that's, a lot of the times that's where our relationships come into play. But we do get questions like, hey, I don't like the way this was written because I don't like the way it was portrayed. If it's not factually inaccurate, we usually can't change it. Part of our job before the article is written is to get a good sense of what the topic is. Never commit to an interview until I know who else is being interviewed, exactly what the piece is about, and the angle. Sometimes, people can be deceptive and, but you'll typically have an understanding if it's going to be a negative piece. If it is going to be a negative piece, you have to make the decision. Do you want to participate in an interview to try to shift it, or do you want to not and let it be written? You can't control everything that's written. Reporters are kind of the third party. We're kind of the liaison between them and the brand, but we can do our best, and a lot of times that's really why you work with us, because doing that as a founder can be a lot stickier versus having us control the conversation.
And if you're talking about like a straight crisis situation, because that happens all the time too, one general rule to follow is figure out what the end is and get there as quickly as possible. That's the only rule of crisis PR, right? And I just saved you a lot of money. So whatever the end is, whatever the truth is, whatever gets you to the end of a given story, get there as quickly as possible. So like Tiger Woods, for instance, because that was like a drip drab story of, it was incredible. It lasted months, a different woman each day. If he had had a strong team around him, they would have sat him down the first day and said, write down our universe here. And he could have gone out there, and that first press conference would have been, I'm a total scumbag. I've slept with 35 women outside of marriage. Like, I understand that I've failed my wife and my family, and I'm a terrible human being. There's going to be revelations that come out in the coming days. Listen, I'm a bad person. I totally fucked up, and blah, 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 right? It totally takes the sail out of it as opposed to just letting it drip, 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 drip. And that was, a lot of it is just literally figure out what the end is and get there as quickly as possible. They're going to uncover everything. And so figure it out. And by the way, apologize. Apologizing is the easiest thing in the world. We've had companies screw up in the way they price something or in the way they launch something or whatever it is. Just be humble about it. As a consumer, think about how you would want brands to react to certain situations and just do it. I know it's like the most brain dead answer, but You know, you look at these companies and you're like, what kind of moron is running that company? It's usually a moron who's trying to overthink a situation. Whereas a lot of times the answer is, I'm sorry I screwed up. I beg your forgiveness. We'll make it right. That's really it.
And usually tell the truth.
Telling the truth is pretty helpful. Yeah.
I've got one
Yeah.
more question. This may retread some ground you covered already. Is there a way to cultivate reporters? You know, there's a famous Mark Suster post in Venture Capital that says, lines not dots. You want to raise money, build relationships over time with investors. Does the same apply to reporters? Can you talk to them outside the context of, I'm a founder? Can you build relationships over time, or is that kind of just a rarefied area that has its own rules?
Well, yes and no. I would say don't reach out to founders don't reach out to reporters, too early. I think the first time you're starting to establish a relationship with a reporter, you should be able to show them something, because they're not going to know you. And so at the beginning, it's going to be pretty purely transactional. They want to see what you have and see if you care. If over time you start to develop a rapport, I think that's really important, and being able to get somebody on the phone and talk to them, but don't mistake them for your friends. You know, your interactions are still going to be business transactions ultimately. You know, I have very few friends in the media. I have people I'm super friendly with, who I've known a long time, who I trust, and who I do a lot of business with. But you know, I don't sit around kind of, you know, acting super chummy with lots of people. And I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope, frankly. So just be careful. You know, keep a cautious distance. You know, the more you open up lines of communication when things are positive, they're going to expect them when things are negative. And so just be you know, cautious. So I think having a good rapport with somebody and being able to get in touch with them is really important. You know, being their best friend and being, you know, invited to their wedding, less so. That would be the way I would think about it. You?
Yeah.
Cool. No worries. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.